Hey guys, welcome back to the channel where you can find all of your basic guides on Total War games. Today we are looking at each individual unit's role of the Beastmen faction. The Beastmen focus on an aggressive playstyle to which they rush their opponents, not giving them a chance to fully set up on the battlefield. Their roster primarily consists of fast-moving melee infantry as well as monsters, but lack armor and leadership. If you're interested in interacting with our small community on Total War discussions, come join our newly created Discord channel in the link below. Also, timestamps can be found in the description if you would like to skip to a particular portion of the video. The Ungor Spearmen's utility is slightly at odds with the main playstyle of the Beastmen faction. They are an awkward unit to fit into any army composition, as the Beastmen don't typically need their front lines to be defended. Their main use is to be left in reserves to counter any cav charges or monstrous charges. Just be sure to bolster them with Minotaurs or other high killing power infantry. The Ungor Herd are an excellent unit for when the Beastmen need to field wide armies. These are your first, quote, frontline unit. Their objective is to engage all enemy frontline units and use the rest to surround them quickly. The Ungor Spearmen Herd with shields serve the same purpose as their unshielded versions with the added missile block chance, and they should always be taken over their unshielded versions. The Gor Herds with shields are the perfect frontline unit when facing ranged heavy factions, like the High Elves or the Empire. The reduced killing power is made up by their hefty melee defense, giving your monstrous units and other fast units plenty of time to flank around the battlefield and also chase down the back line. While the Gor Herd lacks staying power, they are a dangerous offensive unit. You'll want to either mix these in with your shielded Gor Herds, or you can use them to flank the frontline engagements. Be sure to take out the ranged units, because if they are focused by missile fire, they will quickly die. The Bestigor Herd are an expensive armor-piercing unit that excels at contesting the sturdy front lines of your enemies. The Bestigors are great against factions that lack mobility themselves, like the Dwarves and Lizardmen. It just so happens that these factions are also heavily armored, making them the best natural counter. These are best used for engaging the more heavily armored units on the battlefield. The Ungor Raiders are the Beastmen's only ranged infantry. Due to the Beastmen's aggressive playstyle, the Ungor Raiders typically find themselves undefended and vulnerable to cav and flying unit charges. You'll typically want to keep them close to your frontline engagements and focus fire into the more lightly armored units. Centigors are your cheapest cav option. They are very fast, which means you can easily outflank your enemies or quickly chase down ranged infantry, although these versions are best used for chasing down the ranged infantry or the artillery pieces on the battlefield. The Centigors with great weapons are relatively the same as the regular Centigors, but with the added armor-piercing damage and no shield, obviously. These great weapon versions should be used for psycho-charging the frontline engagements, preferably the more heavily armored units on the front lines. The Razor-Gore Chariots. As with every chariot, it is critical to keep them moving as they have massive charge bonus, but not impressive combat stats, so prolonged combat should be avoided. They are best used to crash through enemy ranks and then quickly move on to the next target. Centigors with throwing axes are the Beastmen's primary tool against large armored targets. They are practically a must-have pick when fighting against the Lizardmen. They are fast, mobile, and have good armor-piercing damage. Their range is quite low, so they have to be used carefully. If there are no armored large units on the battlefield, you can always settle for targeting the armored frontline units. The Chaos Warhounds are a very fast unit that can be used for chasing down ranged infantry or artillery, although it is always better to bring the Poison Chaos Warhounds instead. The Poison Chaos Warhounds function in the same way as the regular Chaos Warhounds. They should be used for chasing down ranged infantry or artillery pieces. If there are no ranged infantry to chase, then you can flank the frontline engagements where their poison effects will be extremely helpful in debuffing the enemies. They are also excellent at chasing down routing units. The Razor-Gore Herd are a strange unit on the Beastmen roster. They are a very niche unit. They have high charge bonus and armor-piercing damage, meaning they can crash into their enemies and deal solid damage. They have low melee stats, so they should not be left in prolonged combat. Their high speed and mass make them very useful for keeping up with traditional cav units and surrounding targets, preventing them from escaping. Harpies are a flying unit with a surprisingly high melee defense. They are best used for chasing down ranged infantry or artillery. You can also use them to chase off routing units off the battlefield. The Beastmen Chaos Spawn are different from the Chaos Spawn. These ones apply poison at the cost of less overall damage. Poison is a great ability and makes them generally better combatants than their Chaos counterparts. They are useful in the Beastmen's roster because they are unbreakable. Beastmen armies tend to frequently break and return to the battlefield, but having some units anchoring your engagements is very helpful in the end. Use these as shock infantry, keep them behind your front lines, and then send them into the frontline engagements once your front lines have clashed. Minotaurs are easily one of the most explosive melee units in the game. They have a knack for grinding down infantry on both the charge and prolonged combat. They are also reasonably effective against cav that lack anti-large bonuses. Like all large units, spear and halberd infantry can slowly wear them down. These are best used to bolster your frontline engagements, or you can utilize their high speed to flank the enemy front lines to cause even more damage. The Minotaurs with shields are a great all-round monstrous unit that bring the same benefits as the non-shielded versions. They still retain their strong mobility and armor-piercing damage, but have slightly less melee attack. They do have shields, meaning they have longer staying power and missile block chance. Overall, these can be considered the better version compared to the regular Minotaurs fulfilling the same role, but with higher survivability. The Minotaurs with great weapons are a situational powerhouse unit. They sacrifice raw killing power and defense for a massive anti-large bonus. Given the Beastmen's lack of ranged infantry and general anti-large options, the great weapon Minotaurs are good for bringing against cav or monstrous heavy factions. Their speed allows them to easily collapse on cav and monstrous units engaged in melee. The Giant is your typical frontline engagement monster. They have great armor-piercing damage and anti-infantry bonuses, and also cause terror. These will be used to wreak havoc on the frontline engagements. They do have low armor and a large hitbox, so you should try to take out the ranged infantry before they can focus fire him down. The Centigor is ill-suited for the Beastman's rush strategy, as it is slow and its range power will be wasted. The Centigor is much better when placed in a defensive army. If you are up against a faction that lacks ranged infantry like the Vampire Counts, then this may be an option for you. If this is the case, you can just use the Centigor's ranged power to force the enemy to come to you and easily set up a surround on your enemy. So that about wraps it up for our Beastmen unit roster guide. You can find my suggestions for early and late game army compositions in the video description. Hope you found this useful for your Beastmen campaigns. If you enjoyed this content, make sure you drop a like. Also, hit that subscribe button to keep up to date on any guides I release in the future.